But on a year-on-year basis, the emerging and the developing countries are contributing perhaps 80% to the global GDP growth. 2/5 of the global trade is now with the emerging and developing countries. China is the biggest manufacturing power. But what has happened when there has been a decline elsewhere in established powers of the world who have dominated for 2 centuries? China's rise, economic rise, is not reflected the concomitant rise in its world influence. And the same goes for the other countries which are also on the move. That is where I'll say that there are challenges which all of us have to deal with. When we look at the world map, there's a very clear divide. On one hand, you have the creditor nations, then the debtor nations. The largest economy being the biggest debtor nation or indebted nation, with over $1 trillion of debts. And whereas Germany, China, they are the countries with huge current account surpluses. So these are the creditor countries. They are giving money to others. But there is also another divide I was reading this morning, but we all are aware of. That's the demographic divide. Whereas the median age in a country like India, with a population of 1.2 billion, is 23, 24. In Asia, it's 32. In Europe, maybe 43, 44. And you have countries which are struggling, though they have strengths. A country like Japan, it has demonstrated tremendous resilience after the catastrophe following the tsunami and the nuclear tragedy. But still, they have not come out of it so strongly to be able to lead a major global revival. And that is why perhaps we are talking of countries in a world where a ground zero scenario is there, which Bremer talked of. But ground zero or non-polarity. Now, non-polarity is something, even as transient, it's very difficult to accept. Though there is a general feeling, perception, that no country in the world today is in a position to influence or to bring about quick solutions. That's true. The world is complex, so are the challenges, and the countries are grappling with their internal problems, trying to deal with the fiscal deficits, unemployment, food security, and other related issues. So they are not in a position, as it is felt, to deal with the larger global matters. But still there are many challenges the world faces. Right from food security, where you have 1 billion people going hungry to bed, or of employment creation, 200 million jobs have to be created which are lost, and 400 million eventually jobs will have to be created. By accepted numbers, 1.4 billion people are subsisting in extreme poverty conditions. And minimum 100 million children are out of school, if not more. Despite all the commitments and pledges, when we talk of the countries which are poor in sub-Saharan Africa, also many parts of Asia or South Americas, the Millennium Development Goals, 2015 is coming. If you look at what was pledged, what was sought to be achieved as targets by 2015 will not be achieved. Nations have not kept their commitments, whether on climate change, transfer of technology, or making available technologies to poor countries without bringing in other related commercial issues or considerations like the intellectual property rights and all. I've always said on these issues that planet Earth is one and indivisible. So you cannot have any trade-offs. You have to save it as a whole. It's not a question that I will not give technology to Africa, and if Africa burns a big hole in the ozone layer, it's not going to affect me. That mindset must change. Now, these are the challenges which I listed, but also pandemics. These are transnational in character. They cannot be handled nationally, like the global crisis. And that requires a strategic, cooperative, global partnership. G20 provided a platform. It was promising because it was inclusive. Because the G7 or the G8 realized that they were not representative enough of the contemporary global realities. The world order has changed. After 1945, the world has not remained frozen, though the global institutions have. Whether the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, or for that matter, the United Nations. So the G20 at least halfway met what was the need of the hour to bring in countries, emerging countries, big countries, into the global decision-making processes, because the previous group didn't have the wherewithal to address those challenges. I've always maintained one country or a group of countries, irrespective of the wealth, technology, or power, do not have sufficient means to address these global challenges. That's why I said it needs a global partnership. But also these institutions must change. The United Nations, the Security Council, it's laughable, of course. One correction was made when China was included, and at that time India had fully supported China to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. But when you're talking of Africa, continent which is resource-rich, both natural resources and human resources, many countries registering robust growth, 54 countries, South Americas, and India, the largest democracy on this planet with 1.2 billion people, being out of the decision-making process, not part of the UN Security Council. Will you call it inclusive, democratic, representative? The answer is no. That's why we are saying this must change, so that we have a new order which is capable of not only commanding trust and respect, but also addressing the global challenges that we have. So the world eventually will have to be multipolar. It cannot be unipolar, as was said in 1990-91 after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. It cannot be bipolar, that America is one pole and EU is another pole. Because you have China, you have Russia, you have India, you have Africa, you have Latin America. So it has to be multipolar. There cannot be no other way forward. That should be the 21st century world. But when we are talking of reviving growth, and that's what this conference was dedicated to, there have been many setbacks, but some new windows of opportunity. One major setback has been the non-conclusion of the WTO trade talks, the Doha Development Round. These talks got stalled, log-jammed, though enough was on the table. When it comes to giving access both to the developing countries, to the markets of the developed economies, but to the developed countries, which always had big access to the poor countries and developing countries' markets. And after the economic crisis, there was a new dynamics. Since I was very much involved during that period, and even now,